I'm Tani Minnick. I run Torchlight, a strategic and executive coaching firm, and I also chair CEO peer groups in partnership with Vistage, the global leader in CEO peer groups and leadership development. These groups meet monthly to navigate how to ignite solutions to the challenges and opportunities they face to help them become better leaders and make better decisions. My guest today is psychologist Dr. Bill Crawford. Dr. Bill, good to see you.
Thank you, Tani. It's great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, Dr. Bill is the author of 8 books, a host of 2 PBS specials, and has been quoted in more Pinnacle News publications than we have time to share today. He is a global speaker. He's won Speaker of the Year several times at Vistage, where we have over 2,000 speakers in our portfolio. Needless to say, Dr. Bill Crawford is a subject matter expert on all things brain, but more specifically, the science of clarity, confidence, and creativity. Dr. Bill, thanks again for being with us today. And I'm really looking forward to learning something new about how to get into that part of the brain. So why don't you kick us off by sharing a little about your latest book?
Sure. So the latest book is Life from the Top of the Mind. It's a philosophy, a framework that I've been working on over the last 30 years that is based on brain science and is designed to show people how to shift from this frustration, stress, anxiety, resentment, anger, the stuff that kind of gets in the way of our clarity, confidence, and creativity. That actually comes from a very specific part of the brain. So I show people how the brain works in a really simple way so it doesn't get too complicated. And then I show them how to shift from this frustrated, stressed, reactive brain to this more purposeful, creative, clear, confident, what I call the top of the mind, which is actually the neocortex, happens to be on the top of the brain.
That's fascinating. And how would you say, you're talking about how to shift. And here's an example. Many of the members, the Vistage members and the members in my group, these CEOs are navigating a lot of ambiguity right now. COVID, war, inflation, recession, right? And we are dealing with ChatGPT, AI technology that could replace jobs. And the second largest bank failure in our history just happened. It's a lot. So for some of these CEOs, what would you recommend? How would you recommend they navigate moving out of this place of stress and reaction into the top of the mind?
Yeah, I always start my seminars with clarity about, okay, what's getting in the way of your clarity, confidence, and creativity? And you just did a wonderful list of what everybody's dealing with. So I encourage people to write down what I call their triggers. What's triggering you, what's bugging you, annoying you, getting under your skin, getting in the way of your ability to make effective decisions. And they write this down. And I say, okay, when we find ourselves dealing with all this stuff, how have we found ourselves reacting in the past that we want to have more influence over in the future? Is it stress? Is it frustration? Is it confusion, anxiety, anger, resentment, annoyance, whatever it is? So people write down what they define as the problem. The problem is the trigger. The problem is the reaction. But what they don't understand is really what's going on between the trigger and the reaction. Most people think this makes me this. This difficult person really makes me angry. This uncertainty really stresses me out. This AI stuff really confuses me. But the problem with looking at the situation that way, it makes the trigger the thing that's in control. It makes us kind of susceptible to any kind of negative person or situation that we encounter. And what I show them is the good news is the trigger doesn't actually cause the reaction. There's something that goes on in between, and this is where the brain comes in. So I talk about 3 parts to the brain. Lower part of the brain is called the brainstem. This is the stress, frustrated part. Upper 80% is the neocortex, what I call the top of the mind. This middle brain is the fascinating part. It's the limbic system. It's the scanner, processor, router part of the brain. So it scans incoming data, processes it or interprets it, and then either routes it down to the brainstem or up to the upper 80% of the brain, the clear, confident, creative part of who we are.
Oh,
So that's what's really causing our reaction, this middle brain, which unfortunately isn't very smart, and it's working with old software. So it has a tendency to see almost anything negative as dangerous and throws us into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger. And when we're in this lower brain, we actually block access to the clarity, confidence, and creativity that we need to be successful. And so what happens is people don't know this, so they think this difficult situation is making them feel bad, and they try to use their anger or their stress or their frustration as a motivation to deal with the situation. But since we're stuck in this lower brain, we can't do that very effectively. So now the situation seems to get worse. We feel less effective, and we get caught in an ever-escalating cycle. So when I'm doing a presentation, I talk about new information on the science of the what, the why, and the how. What's really getting in the way of our clarity, confidence, and creativity? And this is that cycle. We get caught in a cycle. Why that's happening? Because the middle brain is misinterpreting something or someone negative as dangerous, throwing us into that lower brain, blocking access to the upper brain, and then the how. So my system is a 3-part system. Okay, now that we know that, how do we shift from this lower brain to the upper brain so we can access the best of who we are?
So it's almost like what I'm hearing, this is a simple, version, but what I'm hearing is the middle brain is like a traffic cop. Okay, takes in, okay, you go that way, you go that way, you go that way, you go that way. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. And this traffic cop is not very smart but it's very fear-based, because in the past, this traffic cop has kept us safe by having us being anxious and worried and angry. So survival, when we were in the jungle and being thrown out of the village, well, being worried about that was a good thing. So this traffic cop has a negative bias. It's not a very smart, rational part of the brain. It's a reactive part of the brain that is mostly designed to keep us safe by keeping us worried and stressed. That's why we have to override that in order to really access our best.
So when we and certainly our members and CEOs are in a state of overwhelm, like all of the things that are happening in our environment right now, there's just so many things coming at them, and they're in that overwhelm. What are some ways that they can? Because sometimes when we have so much coming at us, we can only react quickly, and that's that fear part of the brain, right?
Yes, right, exactly.
So how do we move out of that place?
First thing we want to recognize is, okay, what part of the brain am I in at the moment? There's a wonderful video on YouTube by the Conscious Leadership Group. It's called Above the Line. And it talks about people are either above the line or below the line. So we got to really get clear. Are we in the upper brain or are we in the lower brain? We got to know where we are. But the good news is we can use our reactions as good information about what part of the brain we're in. If we are stressed, angry, frustrated, not just a little bit, but so to the point where we really can't think straight, we are definitely trapped in the lower brain. So knowing that says, okay, the first thing I've got to do is have my clear, confident, creative brain regain control from the lower brain. And the good news is that's not very hard. If you've ever done any yoga or mindfulness or stress management or Tai Chi, breathing is always the first thing they tell you to do, but they never tell you why. The reason you start with breathing is because normally the lower brain controls breathing. But when you breathe with a certain model, I like the 4-4-4 model. You inhale for a count of 4, you hold it for a count of 4, you exhale for a count of 4, say the word relax on the exhale. That actually has this upper 80% of the brain literally regaining control by taking over 2 functions, breathing and muscle tension, normally controlled by the lower brain. So it's a first step in really having the top of the mind regain control from the lower brain is this 4-4-4 breathing. Some people call it the box breathing, where they put another 4 at the end. Any model works. But what you want to do is use that as the beginning. Now, unfortunately, most people stop there. They say, take a deep breath, don't worry, be happy. And you go, well, okay, I can take a deep breath, but that didn't have me accessing my best. So I don't stop there, I start there. Once I have people take the deep breath, say the word relax on the exhale, then I have them ask very purposeful questions. Questions are the search engine for the brain. They actually determine what part of the brain we're in. There's a book out there called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And when we're stressed and we're frustrated and we're anxious, we are asking what I call BS or brainstem questions like, man, what is wrong with these people? Or what is wrong with this person? Or what's wrong with me? Why do I let these people get to me? But that's all lower brain questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I give people 2 questions to ask themselves that will actually begin to identify the best of who they are versus being stuck in the lower brain. And the first question is, what's the statement I want to make about who I am right now? How do I want to define myself right now? If I could choose any quality or characteristic to bring to this situation, how would I like to be? So when I ask my CEOs that and visitors, they say, well, I want to be clear, confident, compassionate, helpful, centered, resilient, in control, influential, really good stuff. So I say, okay, great. Now we know who we are when we're coming from the top of the mind, but just knowing who we are doesn't get us there. We actually have to imagine being that way.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if I say, okay, who are you when you're clear, confident, and creative? What's your tone of voice like? What's your body language like? And how is that different from who we are when we're stressed, frustrated, and angry? So people imagine being that way. And then I say, okay, you've breathed, you've relaxed, you've asked these questions, you've imagined being this way. Now notice the change. How do you feel differently at the end of this model than you did at the very beginning? So breathe, relax, ask, imagine, notice spells BRAIN. So the model spells brain, and it is a model for shifting from the lower brain to the upper brain, accessing the best of who you are, bringing it to life.
Fascinating. So brain, BRAIN, breathe, relax, ask, question,
Imagine, imagine, notice. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I'm reminded of a story. I want to say it's a Native American legend, a story about a boy with 2 dogs in his heart. Have you heard this?
I have. I love that story.
Yeah. So just to finish it up
Yeah,
for everyone,
tell everybody.
the boy, well, and I may tell it wrong, so you correct me. But there's a boy with 2 dogs in his heart, and the dogs are fighting and fighting and fighting, and it's causing a lot of restlessness in this boy. And the boy goes to the elders in the tribe and says, tell me which dog is going to win, because this is very difficult. And the elders say, whichever dog you feed is going to win. So when you walked me through this, it's what I imagined as we have the choice to think from the upper brain or the lower brain, right? And we have to use these techniques because the gut, we're going to want to go to the lower brain immediately. But we have to we have to support, feed, and be mindful about getting into that top 80%, that higher intelligence in a sense. Yeah.
There's a quote that I use in my seminars. It's really not what we feel, but what we feed that creates our experience of life. And unfortunately, when we're caught in that cycle and we're looking externally for who or what's making me feel that way, we're feeding that cycle. And feeding that cycle is feeding this lower brain. We can get trapped in the lower brain just like we get trapped in the cycle. But once we get really clear that that's not who we want to be, we can shift to the top of the mind.
Yes, sometimes we use the term spiraling, and I'm sure that's probably what that is. I've heard the terms.
Yeah, there's a great video out there that talks about the toilet vortex. I just imagine kind of twirling down the toilet, because it feels like sometimes when we're caught in that cycle. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's interesting. Well, Bill, if we also were to talk to these same CEOs who are coaching their teams, would you recommend this technique with their teams? How would you recommend they navigate some of these issues with their teams?
Yeah, when you're number one, we need to make sure we're in the top of the mind and we're coming from the best of who we are. So let's assume that's happening. Now the question is, how do we engage others? Especially those other people, maybe other teams that may be stuck in that lower brain, maybe just as frustrated or even more so, because they have less control than we at the top do. And so farther down the food chain you get, the less control it becomes and the more chaotic it can become. So what I do is I actually have a process that shows people how to engage a person or a team in a way that shifts them from this lower brain to the top of the mind by asking very specific questions. And first thing I do is I make sure that the CEO is reaching for and acknowledging the best of the team. So you don't want to go into a team situation and criticize their worst, because that's where shame and blame and resentment and frustration and anger and all that kind of goes in. It throws the team even deeper into the lower brain. But if your team has ever done anything well, and I'm sure they all have, then kind of saying, I remember when you were working on the Crawford project and you guys knocked it out of the park. What were the qualities and characteristics you brought to being such an effective team during that time? And put that on a flip chart, because they'll come up with, well, we were da-da-da, and we were collaborative, and we listened to each other, and we didn't shoot down ideas right away. And, you can kind of help them with this as going along. But what you're doing is you're bringing out their best, but they are the ones telling you who they are at their best. Mm-hmm. And then when you can kind of get a list of what that looks like and say, I tell you what, given that this is who we are at our best, why don't we kind of have this list in front of us as we go into projects going forward? So we make sure we're going into those projects, bringing the best of who we are to the situation. That can be really helpful.
Yeah. Well, and you do this with teams all over the country, don't you? Is this the type of work you do with them? Can you say more about that?
Sure. So basically, I'll be brought in to work with the leadership team or sometimes the entire organization. It's generally after someone has seen me maybe do a YouTube video or seen something like this or seen me speak at Vistage. And they say, okay, Bill, we want our whole entire team and or entire organization to come from the top of the mind. What do we do? So I come in and I do a version of this depending on the situation. So I show people so that we get everybody clear about who they are individually at their best. And then we start talking about what it looks like when we're all kind of pulling in the same direction, coming from the top of the mind. And, people go, this is great, but I'm afraid it's going to cost too much. And I say, well, here's my policy on fees. I call it integrity-based pricing. It basically says, I believe I'm dealing with people of integrity who probably have a certain amount they can spend to bring somebody like me in. If you'll just get me the maximum that fits your range, I will speak to your organization for whatever that is. And that allows me to speak to a whole lot of different types of organizations. Some people have a really nice budget. Some people have hardly any budget. And it gives me the opportunity to do that.
That's a really mindful way of approaching your business. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I've been doing that for about 10 years and I love it because it takes okay, well, I want this, but you only give me that, but I need that. But it takes the kind of the used car salesman out of the whole process,
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Bill, what are some of the symptoms of those organizations where you coming in would be just a perfect fit for you? What does that look like?
Sure. Well, if you've got a leadership team that really is not doing its job very well, kind of sniping at each other, or sometimes that leadership team, not only, maybe they're kind of okay with each other, but when they turn and start talking to the people that report to them, all of a sudden it becomes kind of command and control versus really nurturing and bringing people out. So when people in the team or the organization get really clear, all right, in order for me to be effective, I've got to take responsibility for coming from the top of the mind, and I show them how to do that. Matter of fact, I actually show them how to rewire the brain so that you go into situations already in the top of the mind, and you don't have to keep shifting and shifting and shifting and shifting. That's part of my life from the top of the mind system. So I get everybody that's in a position of power, CEO, the C group, the leadership team to doing that. And then I start talking to them about, okay, have you ever been frustrated because you've been trying to get Joe to really kind of step up to the plate and do what you want him to do, and Joe just keeps making excuses? Well, this is where part 3 comes in, and I show how to get Joe into this clear, confident, creative, top of the mind, more accountable mindset. And organizations seem to like that a lot.
That's fantastic. I can see how this would be just a real wealth and a real value for teams and how to rewire the brain. So that's terrific. Well, Dr. Bill, one last question for you. You've spoken to about 800 Vistage CEO peer groups. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what they learn from you, what they ask you in these Vistage meetings, and what that looks like.
I really love Vistage. Vistage has become about 70% of what I do. And I understand you're not supposed to make one client 70% of what you do.
It's true.
But I love speaking to Vistage groups so much because I love the people. The people have made a commitment to being there. They have this trust with each other. They've got a connection with the chair. And it's this wonderful environment to come in and say, all right, tell me what's not working. Tell me what's getting in the way of you being as effective as you want to be. And let me give you some new information about the science of how to deal with that differently. So what I love about Vistage groups is they're very open, they're curious, they want new information, they want to be practical. They don't want a lot of psychobabble or theory or research. They want, what can I do this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow? And what Vistage members tell me is they can also use this at home. So one of the things people, because a lot of Vistage members tell me, hey, I'm pretty good at holding it together at work. It's when I get home, that's when I get triggered the most. So I show them how to actually bring this more clear, confident, creative, loving part of who they are to that as well. So they just love that. I love doing it. I call it getting paid to do what I would pay to do. So a lot of fun.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. So we're just going to wrap up today. We learned that if we can become conscious practitioners of leading, and I'm using leading, you said living, but I'm also going to say leading because we're working with CEOs here. Yes. From the top of the mind, by taking time to maybe slow down, do the brain, breathe, relax, ask, imagine, notice technique that Dr. Bill just shared with us. Things are probably, you're going to be able to access your leadership in a more foundational kind of way. Absolutely. So thank you again, Dr. Bill, for sharing your wealth of research with us here today. Join us again where we will continue to explore how to ignite the resources to drive business leadership and well-being